Ready?
Here we go. We're going live. I think this will... Yeah, here we go. I think we're live now. So this should be subtitled. Thank you for everyone who's joining. I've got the subtitles turned on this time. And for everyone who doesn't know, I guess everyone will probably know, but about 9/10 of the viewers of this are probably from Turkey. So hello to everyone from Turkey. And thank you again to Dokuku Nadal for making the video about me and my work on Minecraft. This is an episode about a game that I would like to make. And I'm here with my brother Luke, and we are talking about Fledgeling. It's, Luke, what do you think Fledgeling is about?
So Fledgeling is it's a concept space for I understand it as a concept space for designing a set of games that follow like certain principles. So it's a concept for how we games that we want to be designed in a particular way, and they're also designed in a way that the mechanics kind of lock together in an intricate puzzle. So there's kind of modular in design and fractal in its conception, such that we can make a game that kind of locks into other games and can be expanding and interesting at wherever the player puts their attention. So it's kind of meta procedural generation that is attempting to generate a game around the player towards what they're interested in exploring.
Right. Yeah. It's really focused on procedural generation. If anyone's interested, there's a talk that just came out this morning about procedural generation from the folks who did Crypt of the Necrodancer and Caves of Cud and Dwarf Fortress. They were Dwarf Fortress guys. And that's called Why We Love Procedural Generation from PAX 2023. And so you can look that up and watch that. Those are actual professionals who have actually done this. So, yeah. Thanks, guys. Good morning.
A real quick note about the procedural generation that's in difference. One of the general central conceits of Fledgeling is most procedural generation starts with a seed and then walks it forward. So if you want to have a history, they walk through and they simulate what's going on and they kind of fabricate out, or they're fabricating based on sort of random basis. So Fledgeling is going to try and do the impossible of being more like a dungeon master. If anyone does dungeon mastering, that's one of the things I really enjoy doing with my friends. You're always making up bullshit. You're justifying everything that's happening. You're making up cool stuff, and you're coming up with your reasons after you make up your cool stuff. And that's the back justification engine is a really big part of what makes the Fledgeling what it works in concept. And that is a lot of what we've been talking about is trying to figure out the high level mechanics to architect this back justification so it can make sense of its procedurally generated content. So that's what's going on. Paul, you have some things you brought up to talk about in this particular episode, and we've been so much enjoying all of your Midjourney work. Now that we can more easily visualize what's going on. Okay,
yeah, thanks.
Take it away.
So this is, all the visuals here are from Midjourney. Again, a lot of this is, in addition to be procedural generation, this project of Fledgeling was kind of originally, the name itself is about allowing AI to be unleashed in a productive, helpful way. So this was, I don't know, a decade, 2 decades ago. I started thinking about what kind of things would AI be able to do if it was really as capable as it could become? And so AI art generation is exactly in line with the stuff that I had in mind of I think that we could do much more than we are doing, and eventually the tools are going to develop to allow us to do the things that we haven't thought of yet. So what are those things, and trying to think through the implications of that stuff beforehand so that when it arrives, like it kind of is now, instead of being overwhelmed by it, we can kind of ride it like a wave, like surfing. So anyway, yeah, AI art generation stuff. So the first thing I want to talk about is, let's see. Oh, hang on. I'm going to get the chat here. Not speak Turkish, speak English. Yeah, sorry guys. I don't read Turkish, so I'm not going to be able to respond to Turkish live. And but if you see stuff, yeah, you saw from Adal. Yeah, thank you for coming from over from Adal's channel.
Can we have AI translate Turkish into English for us
We
while
can,
we go?
but it takes some time for me to like copy and paste it into the AI
Actually
thing.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll have to do that after. We'll do it
I mean,
after.
if you want to be a mod on the channel, I can make you a mod on the stream, and then you can do it if
Next
you want
time.
to. Next time, yeah. You know, Anna was doing it for me a little bit, but she's busy with the kids. So anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Candyman. Yeah, I'll try to respond to chat a bit as we go along. All right, so chess-like decoupling of visuals and mechanics. That's what we're at, and this is about a lot of games. You think of what? Like Warcraft or StarCraft, right? StarCraft 2 or StarCraft 1 or almost any game, World of Warcraft, something like that. You have a game, and what the game is both the mechanics of the game and the rules of the game, the interface of the game, and the visual representation of the game, the way that you see the game, what the game looks like. And so this is, I don't know, a lot of games, almost all games are kind of coupled in this way, where the game is both its visual representation and its mechanics, you know, kind of coupled together. But there's no real reason why those have to be coupled together. And a great example is chess. You can have a chessboard, and you can have the chess pieces look like anything you want. You can have them look like very minimalist pieces. You can have them look like sculptures. You can have them look like monsters. You can have them look like anything, right? And the pieces, what the pieces look like, doesn't matter so much to the gameplay, right? They're completely decoupled. The visual representation has no bearing on the gameplay, and the gameplay has no bearing on the visual representation, to a certain degree, right? You want to be able to know what it is that you're making, or what it is that you're doing. You want it to be readable, but it doesn't have to be the exact thing, right? The StarCraft ghost doesn't have to be a lady, and doesn't have to have that voice, and doesn't have to have that gun, right? Like there are a lot of ways you could do it. And for example, the wizard from Warcraft 2 is basically the ghost, right? It's the same thing. It's just skinned differently. And Warcraft and StarCraft are more or less the same. They're just skinned differently. So that's an example of like two different games, quote unquote, that are more or less actually just one game with two different skins. So a game.
So let me jump across
yeah.
to rant about board games. So my one of my favorite hobbies is board games, and there's a whole host of like when people are doing board game reviews and things like this. There's two camps, and some of the people really care about the aesthetic of the game matching the mechanics of the game. And so that we would call theme games. And then abstract games is when you've had some sort of interesting game and they just slap on top some sort of aesthetic. And it doesn't always make any sense, right? Like, I don't know, quilted, right? It's very fun, but it's like it's quilting themed, but it's just currency and Tetris pieces. It doesn't actually have to be quilts. The quilts just made the abstract games a little bit more approachable. And that's towards fledgling. One of the things that we talked about at the very beginning is a strong attachment towards a decoupled mechanics versus aesthetic, even to the point where we're hoping to make I would hope to design games that are aesthetic agnostic, such that you can mod or port in whatever aesthetic you want. And eventually what we'd like to do, of course, is to get AI to generate the aesthetic in the way that you would like, and it matches on top of the mechanics that were designed or crafted. So that's something that is what I'm really excited about AI graphics, especially when we talk about Journey. The idea of generating the visuals in a way that conveys the puzzle, because you can embed information. And this I'm going to jump over really quickly to talk about. We have a set of games that we talk around, and Journey is a space where you are it's exploration based. You're trying to discover new things, and it's spaces and locks, right? Myst is this type of game. And then so are like Metroidvanias also have this type of mechanic in it where you're trying to get new spaces and they're locked behind some sort of puzzle and you need either a key or a solution. And since you can make abstract puzzles in the sense of something like the excellent game The Witness, where you are exploring a space and it's essentially the same puzzle found in increasingly interesting ways of acquiring it, right? But you have this abstract puzzle that's kind of embedded into a landscape. And with the advent of how generative AI functions and the fact that you can embed a concrete seed inside of it and say generate around this, I'm sure that we're going to be able to come up soon with the idea of embedding a particular puzzle or mechanic or shape into your game and then having the AI generate the rest of it around that particular seed. And that seed can be a very, very odd shape, which I'm very excited about.
Right.
Yeah, so decoupling, fledgling, we want it to be decoupled. Can you talk about some examples of it? What is decoupling done well in your mind versus decoupling done badly?
Sure. So I think Civilization, some of the Civilization games and some strategy games do a bit of this, where they have multiple different interface avenues. So you can think of the ways you can interact with the game, the ways you can see what's happening in the game. There may be a variety of ways to do that. So a lot of real-time strategy games don't do this very well, like StarCraft or League of Legends or something like that. You just have one view for how you can tell what's going on in the game, right? You've just got the overhead map, and you can see your character, and you can see what's happening, and you have to kind of figure everything out from that view. But in the Civilization games, like Civilization 1, 2, 3, etc., you can bring up a spreadsheet, more or less, of all your cities and all the production, or Master of Orion 2, right, is another good example. You can see the star map, and you can see where everything is, but you can also bring up a spreadsheet and see everything that way. And so it's a different view of the data that's happening in the game. And it doesn't change, the way that you're looking at the game doesn't change the game, but it does change what you can see about the game and how easy it is to interact with some aspects or others of it. So I could imagine... so like some people play first-person shooters with the graphics turned way down because it increases their frames per second. So it allows them to be more reactive. And that's an example of a different view of a game. But I could imagine a first-person shooter where you'd have tournament mode where it has everything in wireframe and everything's like super, super low poly so that the frames per second can be super high and you can interact with the game in a very responsive way. It doesn't look great, but it allows you to respond to the events that are happening in the game in a very snappy way, right? A very short time frame. And then the people who are watching the game, or you have it view a spectator or something, and the spectator can have it in very high graphics mode, maybe on a very slight delay, so that it can render everything really prettily and everything looks amazing. And so you get the best of both worlds there, because the gameplay isn't necessarily tied to how it looks, right? Maybe when you're playing in tournament mode, all you can see is the hitboxes. Like, you don't see the character models. All you see is the hitboxes, because that's all you need. You just need to be able to tell where you got to click for the hitboxes.
And also, what you could do is you don't care about tournament mode, right? So that's swinging to one side is a fully optimized game towards that particular objective. And the space I'm more compelled by is on the other end, where it's optimized at the other end to try and deliver the experience. So just like you can slide around your difficulty mod, I don't really like gore, but I really like suspense. And I would love to be able to have access to some of these masterfully crafted suspense like narratives and games without actually having to experience all the gore. And the idea is like a fledgling game would be one where the person can make a slider as to how much gore intensity and how much stress intensity they're signing up for, and to be able to have experience that's in that space. So yeah, that's the type of, like, that's an example of taking that same optimization towards a particular end and then spinning the other direction. Which I'm excited for.
And Satisfactory, the game Satisfactory, has a little bit of that, where there are these really horrifying spider monsters that show up in the game and they'll come and chase you and stuff. And they have cat mode, where you can just replace them with a picture of a cat. And it doesn't change the mechanics at all. It just changes it so you don't see the terrifying spider monsters. They just look like a cat. And so it's like, perfect. Yeah, like that, right? It's just like that kind of thing where you don't need to see that terrible thing in order to interact with it. You can see it in a different way. So that kind of stuff, right, just kind of applied to the whole game and everything about it. So I don't really have anything to say about the visuals here. I actually generated this image like this morning as we were talking.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on any more than you do about this stuff. But this is Midjourney's idea of decoupled aesthetics.
1 and 4 are both to me. 4 looks a lot like I imagine Journey is going to be, where you have these spaces, and we talked about it also possibly being a platformer space.
Yeah.
But I actually was thinking about there's a often neglected genre, which is the point and click adventure game, and I think AI generation for visuals is for point and click adventure games, or which have kind of merged with this kind of Scandinavian um, uh, hidden object games where you're trying to find hidden objects inside a space. And I was thinking we haven't actually talked about this yet, but I was thinking a way to approach a game and Journey is to make the puzzles be hidden object puzzles, which are very easy to procedurally generate by just putting the pieces in there and then having the AI fill in the space in between, right? Then we look at that space and then we describe what it's like, and then we try and paste a story between those things. Anyway, so just throwing it out there as a different way to get towards Journey that doesn't have to do with 3D modeled or platformer, and there wouldn't even be WASD, right? That's not the game place we'd be playing in. But it would still be very much Journey.
Yeah. Okay, so we got a question. We got a question in chat saying, "What kind of game is this going to be? Is it something like Minecraft?" That's a difficult question to answer. It is something like Minecraft in that it's procedurally generated and has a very large world, right?
Do you have that chart? The rings with the five.
Yeah, let me pull that up.
I think it's really useful for trying to describe. It's not necessarily a game, right? It's a set of design criteria to make games that we are calling the fledgling game, right? And the fledgling is basically a game. It's a project name for games that can be added together in a particular way. So it's a game design space. I have in my mind a few games I would like to make inside fledgling. So Breadwinner is probably like a clicker game.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's definitely a thing. And you're not going to find them on here. These are the games that Paul has imagined. I want to play Space Wheat, which is an expansion of Breadwinner into an economies game that like plays in space. So you have this economy and trade, and you're making wheat. But you could make tachyon crystals. It doesn't matter to me, right? It's the mechanics that I care about. And then that's I don't know. There's also I forgot what I called it, but there's another one where I want to make a social game. So that's the mechanics of how social interaction work, and it's like it's a lunch table. That's what it is. It's lunch table. I originally imagined it's like a bunch of catty schoolgirls sitting at a lunch table, and it's just a conversation going on each lunchtime, and in the background, lots of stuff is happening. Like there's a church, and there's a school and a government and all these types of things, and they're all characters that are interacting like the lunch table people. They have the same mechanics going on at the different level, and then you have that space. Anyway, so once you get that going, that's something you could plug into Space Suite, and now you have economy with politics. And it's this idea of constructing games in such a way that they can all lock together and module out into a very, very complex situation that you don't have to engage with.
Right. Yeah, you can engage with whatever aspects of it are interesting to you at the time. And there is a danger in that of making it too idiosyncratic, right? Like if you can craft your experience, you might end up in a place that is only interesting to you, and that's a danger from the game designer perspective as well, right? Like I tend to only explore places that are interesting to me, and it's like, well, is this going to be interesting to anyone else? Maybe not, but anyway, that's what's interesting to me, so that's what I'm exploring right now. Anyway, I've got the image up here. If you guys want to, I put a link in chat for the live stream of it's the previous one that we did, Fledgling Talk number 9, and we kind of went over all the different sub games and some ideas of what they might look like. And to answer your question directly, the one that's most like Minecraft is Uplift. So if you're interested in a game that's like Minecraft, Uplift is that game. Uplift is the kind of coming from the direction of Minecraft and approaching the fledgling idea. You could think of these as games that they're like portals or like pathways from other genres into fledgling. Maybe that's a good way of thinking about it. All right, pulling
Let's talk
that
about
down.
winnable seeds.
Yeah, okay, so let's go to the next topic, winnable seeds and fairness. So, this is something that's talked about in that other thing I talked about, or that other thing I brought up,
Yeah,
the other
we talked
talk.
about procedural quests and like, can you actually make it through? Can you complete this game?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of procedural generation games tend to be minimalistic in their confidence in the players, or in their affordance for the player's success. So Minecraft does this pretty well, actually. Minecraft is always winnable in that there's always a portal from the, or I think there's 3 actually, from the main area into the end. And, there's always an ender portal. There's always a way to get from, there's always like ore in the ground, right? That kind of thing. There's always the resources you need in order to beat the game. But a lot of roguelike games or the older procedural generation games, maybe Starflight, I think, was one of the first space exploration games. They don't have this assurance. They don't make the game in such a way that it is actually possible to beat the game. So like Rogue, the original Rogue, there are some seeds where you just can't win. Like it isn't possible. Or there's a bunch of gotcha deaths where you'll die and you don't know why, or there's no way to avoid it, right?
Rain World is a modern game, wonderfully crafted game, but also has quite a few no-win scenarios. And he compensates by this for having an iterative gameplay where you just die sometimes, and it's like, it's just harsh. Whereas on the other side, Spelunky was one of the first procedurally generation games that was praised for always being winnable yet very intricate, and that was, I think, it's kind of its claim to fame. So Spelunky versus Rain World are kind of 2 examples of this space. Fledgling as a concept, I feel like winnable is optional. I tend to think more the other direction. The general way that AI functions is kind of it's approximate, it's loose, it's probabilities, it's quantum computing type thinking, right? So my background's in physics. I'm always thinking about physics, but the idea of like embracing that as a central mechanic, to me, like having a definite concrete pathway inside of this procedurally generated space would be my ideal outcome. So it can be winnable because you have your seed is a pathway that is a narrative that's accomplishable. And that's actually what the game designer would be making, is a pathway. And then the space around that is all generated procedurally, and it will hopefully make some more of sense. But if you're playing out there in the fringe of a game, so if you're playing Breadwinner and you found yourself way over in the corner in a romance thing, which I haven't designed for, right? My narrative is about bread and economies. And if you're way over here trying to date someone, that should be doable because you have a full dialogue options and characters, right? That's all should be functioning. I just can't guarantee anything about your experience over as playing Breadwinner as a dating sim. I don't know what it's going to be. It should be doable that way, but I just can't guarantee it. So winnable. Can you date the person? Maybe not, because your objectives are not the same objectives as my design. But completable should be a thing.
Yeah. So the idea of fledgling brings into it another aspect of this that most games don't have to struggle with, because most games have authored content. They have authored assets, right? The visuals. They've got an authored storyline. They've got authored mechanics, and they have an authored win state. Minecraft does have an authored win state, but it's kind of loose, right? Like you could play Minecraft and never defeat the Ender Dragon; it'd be okay. You could always make a house or run off and explore or whatever, right? And play the game and not ever lose, not ever die or die permanently, but also not ever win, right? A lot of games kind of force you into that space, right? They force you to either win or lose. Pac-Man or something like that. You can't just keep playing forever. You've got to either beat the game or lose the game and start over. A lot of roguelikes too, right? You have hunger mechanics and you're going to run out of food and run out of resources, and so you've got to keep playing and you've got to beat the game or lose. So that's kind of the game designer forcing you to engage with their pre-authored win-loss condition. Fledgling is kind of the opposite, where you can kind of branch out into the space and never encounter the author's intended win-loss condition. If you're in a scenario that even has a win-loss condition, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I guess it's principle. We don't need too practical on that one, but yes, winnable seeds, kind of like winnable pathways, and then everything else. Great. Let's talk about the next thing. Let's talk about fractals. Oh God, let's talk about fractals.
So, there's a game that just came out. Or is it come out yet, or is it coming out soon?
I don't know. All my friends are playing it. So.
Okay, it must have come out already. Starfield. I like the idea of space games and like space exploration and stuff, because space is this limitless possibility, right? You could find anything out there, and especially in a fictional world, you can put anything you want on another planet in another star system, and it's just like it could be anything, right? It's like the high seas exploration. Who knows what you're going to find on the next island, only in space, and who knows what you're going to find on the next planet, and maybe you'll find even some new kinds of physics or something, right? Like that didn't exist in your home system or something, and it's kind of magical in that way. But the game Starfield is approaching this from the very Bethesda-like, very strict narrative, kind of a post-apocalyptic-y feeling. They did the Fallout games. They've done Skyrim and all the Elder Scrolls stuff. But it has this kind of flat feeling to it, where the game kind of makes sense. Like, they've got a lot of simulation stuff going on, but it's right at the individual player character level. It doesn't have a lot of depth in the spatial or social or game space sense, right?
Right. So my a quick description of this is like Skyrim. There's hundreds of characters, and they all have stories, and they're all doing stuff, and they all go to work, and they all come back. And they were very proud of this with Oblivion. It's like every person in their city has a job. They get up, they go to their store, they do the thing, and they go back to their house, and they go to sleep. It's like, that's fascinating. However, what they did not produce in Skyrim, well, they didn't really produce it in Oblivion, and they didn't produce it in Skyrim for sure. They didn't produce any emergent mechanics. They didn't. No, there's no emergent entities. Like the Whiterun doesn't end up functioning as a city by itself. There's a character that's a king that functions as a character of a king of a city, and it interacts with another king. But you don't have this kind of emergent thing going on where you have all the things interacting with each other towards their own particular ends, driving kind of the intent of something. So I really like 4X games, and the idea of fractal in this design space in particular is the idea of you want to be able to play Stellaris and zoom into your planet and find Skyrim, right? Where everything can make sense in this world. Right. And you go down at the layer and it still makes sense there. And you go into the dating sim level and it still makes sense there, right? It's like every layer of engagement, it should be able to be justified and make sense at each layer. Whereas you come back to Skyrim, it's flat. All this stuff is happening, and what's happening at one layer up, it's like there's a rebellion. It's like a one action in this political space, and it's not It's not capturing up. And I would love there to be a lot of things going on at that layer above the player, and they're caught in the middle of a world. And then also that there should be things going down at layers below that the layer doesn't care about, such as skin layers and fat tissue, and a la Dwarf Fortress, where they have a lot of stuff going on deep into the mechanics that are way outside the player's attention. Should you want to investigate? And that's the idea of fractal design, is that you're trying to make systems that interact, that are going to be able to echo up and down these chains. So if you have political mechanics that are interacting at a layer, you should be able to have an echo. It can't be a copy, because otherwise the game becomes homogeneous, but there should be echoes of these mechanics up and down into the different strata of a particular type of mechanic. So like diplomacy, social interaction, trade, etc. That should all be echoes of each other. Whereas like violence at the small layer and at the high layers, again, I punch, I light attack and heavy attack with my army and with my sword, right? So a fledgling game has these echoes of mechanics up and down wherever strata, and that's really important to the design of it. So that way, all the mechanics can lock together in very consistent ways. Another example of this that I like to talk about, we were talking about earlier, multiple views.
It's also important because then you don't have to author all the different mechanics at every different level, right? Because you only really want to have to author the mechanic once and have it apply at multiple different levels, ideally, right? Because then you can tweak it or alter it or affect it in some way, and that will change the whole game. Instead, a lot of people will do procedural generation where they hand author the procedural generation, and we kind of want to make meta procedural generation where you can make the engine that generates the procedural generation engine, so that, right, it's a meta process too. Ideally, none of this really works yet, but that's what we're shooting for.
In the Total War,
Yeah,
I wanted to jump in. Yeah, it's fine. Total War was my favorite example of this. It's one of the first games that I played that kind of started approaching this idea that you're playing games on multiple levels. And then Stellaris took this and kept going, where it's actually a real-time strategy game that's played like a turn-based game. And all of your ships fly in real time, and then they jump across, and then they have their little fight. But the time scales are really different. So you can like slow it way down. And I would love to be able to play Stellaris and like slow down an important battle and micro that battle. And that's not really a thing, because you used to be able to do that in Master of Orion too, and you could micro the battles in ways that allowed you to get an advantage there as well.
Yeah, and Kings and Kingdoms. What was there was a game where you had castles.
Lords of the Realm too.
Lords of the Realm, yeah, where you could micro the battles.
Right. So the idea is like, and you don't have to. You can hit the auto battle button, and sometimes you'll do better. And that idea of being like, abstract this or don't abstract this, but we know how the mechanics are going to work, right? And we have some sort of consistency. Anyway, that's the idea of this type of thing where it all runs in the same world, but Stellaris is not rendering each spaceship when you're looking at your economy theme. It's just keeping track of where it is. Anyway. So that's the idea of fractals, and we'll come back to
fractal sensibility. And so, like in Starfield, I also want the game world to make sense. This is something that matters a lot to me because I'm an engineer, and so like if something doesn't make sense, I don't feel like I'm learning something valuable from the game. This goes back to my game design philosophy that games need to be teaching you something valuable about something that would be incredibly dangerous or expensive to learn in real life. So violence, right? Violence is something that's like really dangerous. You don't want to get shot at. But if you can learn about violence in a game, then it's really valuable to you. And so that makes the game feel engaging. And it actually is valuable to you because if you ever need to use that knowledge, you'll have learned about it in a low-cost way. So when a game presents a scenario to you, when a game presents a scenario to me, I feel like I need to feel that scenario is in some way sensible, realistic, and comprehensible, or else I feel that the game is cheating me out of the valuable time that I'm putting into it. It's not teaching me anything valuable in return, right? Because it's got this contrived situation. And like Connect 3 games are like this, not because the Connect 3 game is an arbitrary situation. It's fine to have arbitrary situations that you're engaging with, but like when something drops in off the top of the screen, the game can generate whatever it wants as it drops in off the top of the screen. And so I'm not engaging with it in a way that I'm confident that the game is treating me fairly, right? And maybe it's dropping in stuff to make my game harder. Maybe it's dropping in stuff in to make the game easier. I have no way of telling, right? And so it doesn't feel like it's a realistic challenge because I don't have all the information I need to make the decisions I want to make. And Starfield is another great example of this, where the game world itself doesn't make any sense. You've got all these spaceships and they can do faster than light travel, but like they've got artificial gravity. Why would you want artificial gravity in space? Like it makes everything. Artificial gravity is a whole topic for like but like everything about it is just so silly. It's like as a high school drama that is playing out in with the set dressing of space travel. And it's like, okay, if it's a high school drama, fine, and you're all here and you like have to be here together, and there's these guys you have to get along with, and there's the one bully that you gotta like fight against or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's fine story to tell. Like I don't have anything against that kind of story. But when it's dressed up as if it's this really important, super, amazing space exploration game, it's like, no, it's not. Like, if you want a real space exploration game, you can play Kerbal Space Program, which is a great game because it actually engages with the orbital mechanics. You've got real physics. You've got to deal with your reaction mass. You've got to design your mission and think it through. You've got to figure out everything you need and everything you need to bring with you, and all the fuel you need to bring the stuff that you need to bring with you, right? All that stuff is there in the game. It's all in the mechanics, and you can actually engage with it. And it actually applies to real life. If you want to do real space exploration, you could really learn a lot, not everything, but a lot about it through Kerbal Space Program. So Kerbal Space Program is great, Starfield is terrible, and it's not because one is more epic than the other, right? Like, the epicness isn't the problem. The epicness is a symptom of trying to make the game feel like it's important without actually being important.
So let me jump off of. I'm not so eager to say that he's terrible so much as
Sure.
It's certainly not Fledgeling.
No, it's not
very,
Fledgeling.
very
Absolutely,
far
yeah.
from Fledgeling.
Yeah.
Right. So oftentimes people talk about procedural generation, and we're saying like, here's a game that probably has a lot of procedural generation, I assume, but like you can go explore all this stuff. But it's nothing like Fledgeling. Whereas Kerbal Space Program is very deliberate and has not much procedural generation at all, and it's actually quite a bit closer to the design space of if you took Kerbal Space Program and you had AI generated ship components, right, procedurally, and like now you got a game. And then if you took those things and you built
procedural generated planets
that
that you could land on, and procedurally generated orbits and things.
Right. Yeah, so if you had procedurally generated planets, like you could spin, which I'm assuming there's mod crafted other orbits that you can.
I think maybe, I'm not sure. I know that there are like player generated planets, but it really isn't set up for proc gen at all, like in any of its aspects. So it's very difficult to plug that into the game. But anyway, yeah, I agree. Right. KSP has it does have one thing, which is time dilation. You can speed up and slow down the flow of time, and that's one of the things that was really engaging with me, because like, this is it. This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where so many games, Factorio, for example, or Satisfactory, a lot of the factory games, you play the game at 1-to-1 speed, and so a lot of the things seem super unrealistic, because you can build a building in no time, right? You just like push the button, like poop, a building pops up. It's like, well, that's not realistic. But then also, you're sitting there waiting for stuff to construct. It's like, well, I'm just sitting here doing nothing. Like, I'm just got the computer running. Like, why am I burning processor hours running this game when I'm not interacting with it at all? I should just be able to skip forward to the point where I built all the things that I need to build. So the time dilation in KSP is so good, because it really does deal with a real problem that, like, sometimes you do your transfer burn and then you wait for a year to get to where you're going. And in KSP, you just like push the fast forward button until you get there. And it actually has, I know there was a mod, I think maybe they integrated it into the game itself, but there was certainly a mod that was an alarm clock where you could set like, hey, when I get to the point where I've at this point on my orbit, I want to come out of fast forward, because something that would happen in KSP is you like fast forward right past your burn transition, and you just like zoop right by it, and oops, I missed it. So
right.
So having triggers and stuff like that. Yeah.
Let me talk about Total War again, because I do really like this game.
Yeah,
but
go for it.
Total War, and like I don't want Total War to be better, and one of the ways is talking about exactly what you want. If you have expressed to the computer that you care about battles, right? Well, actually, no. The game is designed around battles, so you have this idea of like the battle's important. When the armies get within striking distance or sprinting distance of one another, you want, like, where normally in the turn-based Total War, it would stop. You would start that fight and you line up your thing. But instead, what I'd like, if we're to slow down and say, like, an alert, it'll give you an old ping and be like, we're slowing down because this part contains a lot of interest. You're going to want to put your attention here, and it's going at a slow pace. So you zoom way in, and you can scroll in, and it'll generate your armies, and you can actually do the fight between the armies, and like they just keep running away. It's like, okay, well, let's just keep chasing, and now we can like fast forward. But the time scale on this is basically the rest of the strategic map is on pause, because they're going to chase each other for several hours, and your strategic map is playing by the week or something like that. So the idea of like zooming in towards really moments of high interest, and the fledgling approach is like however you do your mechanics of something interesting is happening on a different time scale or a different scale of something else. Here's an alert, bring your attention over here, and it like will guide your attention to something that's interesting to you, right? It should be done in such a way that you can abstract it and apply it to something else. So it's like doing breadwinner, and there's like, hey, there's a convention going on where there's the bread and wheat convention or whatever else, and you're like, you go over there, and it's a very dense social interaction where you're doing commerce very, very quickly. And then before you go back up to this kind of slow scale commerce that's happening very slowly. Anyway, so that's the idea, is that like thinking from Fledgling has the same approach to many different parent looks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and in addition to all of that, Fledgling has the idea of extrapolating backward so that you can go up to the larger scale, and you're doing your commerce simulation, and then you're like, wait a minute, this army arrived on my doorstep. How did they get here? And the game doesn't know how they got here, but you can reverse extrapolate, and maybe even you can play back in time somewhere where the army showed up, and it's like, well, they defeated your outpost or something. So you can play the battle where they defeated your outpost, and the objective is to be defeated because that's what happened, because that's how the army got to where they are. But then you can be defeated in an interesting way or whatever, right?
So one of the other design things that we talk about a lot is like being able to generate the back justification and then going into that space and then altering it so that the future that happened doesn't happen.
Yeah,
right? Because
that's also something you can do.
Occurring, right? It's like,
right.
And if you think about kids on the playground playing pretend games, they're like, I summoned the thing. It's like, no, you didn't. I have so-and-so was there all along.
Uh-huh.
And there's
like that.
a take that interrupt mechanic. And this is done excellently in a tabletop game called Cloak and Dagger, I think this is called. And the game mechanics here are as players, you sit around and you're doing a heist, right? But normally what happens is you sit around a planning table and you plan your heist, and then you like try and execute. And that's really boring. So instead, the game is you budget an amount of time and resources towards this heist.
Okay.
And then you do the heist, and you all just bullshit why you already solved this problem. It's like, there are 2 guards. And it's like, I spent yesterday bribing these guards. I spent 400 gold, and the DM's like, all right, this guard situation is handled, and you're back justifying why you did all of these things.
Right.
And then
I saw this coming.
If you could justify that, I scouted this, I knew this was happening, and I did this other thing. And then the DM is also is available to say like, no, you didn't know. You're surprised by this, and now you got to deal with it in real time.
Mm.
So you're playing the game kind of in these 2 different parallel time schemes in ways that the You can very collaboratively have these
Right.
great moments that you're like, oh, I know how I could have solved this problem, and you have a mechanic to allow you to say that, and I love that.
So it does some temporal interrupt and back justification stuff
Right.
that we're talking about. And also, I'm imagining, I haven't played Cloak and Dagger, but I'm imagining that if you're playing the game and you do encounter a surprise scenario where it's like, well, you can't have dealt with this beforehand, you can still say, well, but I brought along a bunch of rope
Right.
and a grappling hook, because, I mean, obviously I would have done that.
Right.
And it's like within my budget or whatever, right?
Right. And I think they make you pick what you're bringing. I'm not sure, but there's other games like the torch, nah, shoot, Burning Wheel, where your inventory is a resource and you roll against it. So you're like, I have that, and you like roll, and you're like, you do have that, and then was like, but if you roll and you don't have it, then your inventory goes down one level,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah,
it's just,
yeah.
so like now you have less stuff.
It's like a quantum
Um,
backpack where it's like, well, I'm pretty sure
it
there's
just
this thing in here.
exactly, and it actually it ends up that's also how they handle money and a bunch of other things, and I really like that because the mechanics are the same. You do a fight and it's like, well, I failed this fight, so you lose some health and you can't fight as well anymore, right? So like it's a very general mechanic that applies to a lot of different things. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
really great one.
Oh man, yeah. So we could talk about this. Obviously, we could talk about it forever because it's fractals, and so like it's never ending. Let's move on to procedural research as a shifting landscape. I don't think I've talked about this with you, but we've talked about it a little bit in regards to probably Jackal Star.
Jackal Star and Warmth. We've also talked about this, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Um,
Yeah, research. Warmth doesn't have so much research, maybe, but anyway, I was thinking about it the other day about the idea of the grid and hey, hi, welcome, guys. We've got another wave of viewers coming in. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. If you're joining us in the middle here, we're talking about Fledgling. It's a procedural generation family of games that are trying to achieve the perfect integration of player agency and AI integration in game space. So we're talking about procedural research. So the idea is that in a lot of games they have a tech tree, and you've got you start off with the low tech thing, and then you can get the stone pickaxe or the wood pickaxe, and then you can get the stone pickaxe and use a stone pickaxe to get iron, and now you can get the iron pickaxe, right? It's this very like pre-authored chain of technologies that you can unlock or research in some ways. Like Factorio has the research tree, and you can unlock things, and it's got a little bit of branching, and it's got a little bit of variation. Well, not usually very much variation, but Master of Orion 2 did have some variation most of the time because you couldn't unlock all the technologies in every playthrough unless you were playing a very specific race with a specific advantage. And so
why wouldn't you play that race? Anyone?
right, sure, but you'd unlock these technologies, and then you can steal them from those guys, right? You just let them
Yeah,
research
that's
them, and then
great.
you steal them. It's a lot less work that way. But when you're unlocking these technology, you're always unlocking a technology that the game designer came up with in advance, and they thought that this would make a good play experience. And so there's two main problems I can see with that. One is that you can look up in a book, like the player can look up in a book or in the manual or in the wiki or whatever, like what technologies there are, what they do, how to get to them, how to unlock them, how to research them, and which order to unlock them in, and the perfect playthrough. You can chart your course through this research landscape ahead of time. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the idea of research. The idea of research is that you're going out into the unknown. You're going out and exploring some place that nobody knows, that nobody even knows is possible, right? It's like, well, is it even possible to make a fission reactor, right? Like nobody knew at the time. It might have been impossible. And there's lots of things that people were like, I'm pretty sure this is possible, and they tried it and they tried it and they tried it, and it turns out it's like, well, no, it just doesn't work. Right? In real life, this thing just can't be done. So the idea of research is kind of defeated from the get-go at its very inception by the idea of having a pre-authored tech tree. And the other thing is that the other way in which it's kind of weird in its treatment of research is that it's something that everyone can see. Like all the players, like even in games that have some uncertainty, like in Master of Orion 2, about when you're going to finish researching something. There's still like, it's going to take this many research points to unlock this technology. And you know that in advance. And it's like, you shouldn't know that in advance. Like, it shouldn't even be sure that it's possible to do this thing, let alone how much effort it's going to take. Like, nobody knows this. That's the whole point of research. So if the procedural generation of the game is like the mechanical, very physical aspect is like, well, you should be able to look over there and see what's going on. You should be able to ask people like how they got here. And most games just don't generate that stuff unless it's pre-authored. So there are a lot of things that should be knowable in the world that just aren't in most games. Conversely, there are a lot of things that should not by anyone be knowable in any way in the game that in most games are totally knowable, and in fact you do know from the very beginning before you even start playing the game. So it's this rectifying these spaces of the known and the unknown, the order and the chaos, right? That I feel like is part of this idea of procedural generation. So I would like in the Fledgling family of games for research to be something where you really are exploring something where none of the technologies have been authored beforehand. They're all generated at runtime and maybe even generated at playtime, right? Like the technologies don't even exist until you've explored enough, and maybe one of them, drops more or less as a random event.
I have a few thoughts I want to throw in.
Yeah, okay. And put some notes in, because the other aspect is when you're in research space, quote unquote, right? You're dealing with ideas and the different entities in the game, the different characters in the game, even maybe the same character at different times in the game should have a totally different view of what the research landscape looks like, because you have to visualize this somehow. And it seems like a very optimistic character. I've got two images on the screen here. Maybe a very optimistic character would see like, oh, well, this is a very obvious thing. There's the sun right in the background. This is what we're aiming for. We're going to go there, and there's a little valley in between the mountains, and we're going to be able to get there really easily. We just go straight forward and we're going to get there. And another character might see the space as this mountain, right? And it's like, well, maybe there's something at the top of the mountain that looks like there's something, but it's going to be a huge amount of effort to get up there, and we don't even have a path, right? There's no road, there's no way to get in there, and there's no possible conceivable way that there would be, because it's at the very top of this huge steep mountain, and so we're going to have to work really, really hard and climb all the way up this thing, establish base station after base station, and like really, clamber our way up to there. And when we get there, we don't even know if there's something valuable up there. Maybe it's just a cool view, like, maybe we won't even discover anything useful. So the way that, so there's both of those aspects of the landscape shouldn't be charted out beforehand. It shouldn't probably even be charted out when you're playing the game, except when you are actually exploring it. And the way that it's represented should be vastly different depending on the situation, your goal, the people that are involved with it, what you're trying to accomplish, all those, how much funding you have, right? How secure you are in the rest of the game world, maybe. All this stuff should be like have an impact on what it even looks like for you to attempt to research something. So yeah, those are my thoughts. And this aesthetic is something that I've been thinking about for a while, of like the grid on the floor. There's this very 80s representation of like this neon outline wireframe mountains over this grid, right? And it's like the metaverse or something. But it really is a great representation of this, the grid being the known, the farmland, the area that's been under cultivation and is understood, and then the mountains in the background being like, well, there's stuff out there. Most of it is just wilderness and useless to us, but maybe there's something really valuable out there in the mountains that we can attain, but it's going to be costly and dangerous to go on an expedition out there. So anyway, yeah. All right, please, your thoughts, Luke.
Yeah. Sure. First off, this is what the inside of my brain looks like, and I think it's also somewhat what the inside of Paul's brain looks like. So, yeah. Okay. Research. You're talking about unknown versus not known. So to our listeners, one of our dynamics is Paul's brain works very, very fast to go to the ultimate conclusion of some sort of principle. So you set him up with a particular set of design, and he'll push all the way to the full thing, like the competitive game that is only the hitboxes with no aesthetic. Right? It's an idea squeezed out to its spiking conclusion. And I tend to think much more in a abstract, diffuse space somewhere in the middle is my thinking style. So when you're talking about research, it's like, what if we had a research game where we went all the way out here? And it's like, okay, well, I like the idea of error bars and like it's like difficulty. You have your scientist is like, I think this is really hard, and also I'm just going to roll dice on it until I get it. I was like, I think it's really hard, but I have no idea how hard it is, right? So then you have those wide error bars, and it might be impossible. You might be rolling zeros, but you might also be rolling really high. You might be rolling 90% chance every turn. And then you must all have like narrow bars. It's like, we need to enrich the uranium. That's the next technology piece, and we know it's possible. It's gonna be really hard.
Yeah, we haven't worked out the details, but we know that it's physically possible. Might not be technically possible, right?
Right, and then it's going to take a long time and a lot of money. We got to build this giant centrifuge and all this type of stuff. So it's like we kind of move across. Anyway, so that was error bars. I think that would be a more approachable way of doing research instead of going all the way out to no knowledge about things. Pre-authored central nodes as game design. So like my motivation for participating in Fledgling is I have games in my mind that I would like to design so other people can play them, but I don't have a system in which to design them. So the idea of having technology that's totally open-ended, I talked earlier about having like a narrative path through a space, like Breadwinner. You're trying to make the best bread, right? That's the game. And if you want to play a dating sim on the side, just like a research tree that's completely open, it's going to be a unauthored fledgling area, right? And any mechanics you plug in there are going to be unauthored, perfectly procedurally generated. And I am going to have a design space around bread. And it's the idea of it, like, it doesn't matter that it's bread, it's whatever it is, it's designed around that particular resource exchange. And then the idea of having technology for bread, it's like, well, I have a story in mind about how bread works, and I can put these technology nodes in place. And then I can leave Fledgling to do its procedurally generated to link those together. So everyone's journey through those central nodes will be different. But the central
nodes exist. So there's like multiple levels of uncertainty. One of them is uncertainty about even existing, right? It's like, well, no, the nodes regarding bread do exist. And then one of them might be uncertainty versus path, right? Where like maybe you even have a few of those connected together in a specific way so that beginning experience is always the same, or is certain to happen. Where it's like, well, you can get some flour and you can mix it with water and knead it with some yeast, and that'll make bread, right? And that path
maybe your
exists.
Character starts next to a river versus your character starts in a desert trading post. Both of them are dealing with bread, but both of them are going to be dealing with bread in a different way.
Yeah. And so then there's also uncertainty, versus the physical starting conditions as opposed to the intellectual or conceptual landscape. There's like the two different landscapes, right? Of the conceptual, maybe research landscape, and the physical embodiment landscape.
It's pre-authored. That's where game design would come in, and that's why I'm trying to build this thing is to generate the rest of the game around the design space.
Around that central authored, kind of those central authored nodes, and you could have multiple, right? Where you've got like the central space is like, you've got a character that's a human, so that's like central authored, and there's a few bread-based nodes that are all connected together, that's like making bread or whatever. And then there's some technology which is like, high quality wheat or something that you can grow, but it isn't anchored in idea space. So in each playthrough, it might be in a different place, and there might be a different path to get there. And then if you go further out than that, maybe the fledgling system will author some stuff for you that even you, the game designer, aren't aware of and will be completely different
Right.
from game to game, depending on what the player's doing and what they're interested in, what other systems they've slotted into it, right? Maybe you've got the space travel thing slotted
What
in
else
or whatever.
exactly,
Yeah.
or fairies, right? If you have like
Sure.
if you're a fantasy breadwinner, now you have like you have giant bread that's made of bones or whatever else, right? It can be like,
Yes.
who knows. And
Yes.
I want to slot it. I want the breadwinner. I would like to fit inside of Space Wheat, which is like this interstellar commerce game with the 4X, where the main output is wheat instead of energy crystals. But it doesn't matter. We already do this. Real quick note about Root. Root does a very, very cool thing that's central to. It's a great example. If those of you don't know it, it's a board game in which it's asymmetrical. So it's up to 4, I think 5 players now. You can play all at once, and every player at the board has a different set of mechanics that all interact over a little node-based board. And it's got 3 different things. So there's suits, and it just operates like there's 3 different suits of spaces and pathways between them, and everyone interacts with those spaces in different ways. And they have kind of central mechanics. So like most people have warriors and most people have buildings, but then everyone has different player boards that does different things. But they're all playing and sharing a space together. So the idea of fledgling is very much like this, of trying to make a centralized mechanics system, which in this case is nouns and verbs, is where like the concept space is. And then we're building mechanics around shared nouns and shared verbs. And that would be a game. So Root is a great example of a very of utilizing the same resources in many asymmetric ways, which I think is very central. That's it. That's all I had to say on that.
All right. Game design satisfaction versus the player. Emergent surprise versus smoke superiority. So there is, this is kind of getting into the game design side and justification for, talking about the justifications for using procedural generation and stuff. But I've noticed a kind of feeling in the game designer, before we leave Breadwinner, Arcanos says the bread needs some mini breads. Fractal bread, I think, is what he's suggesting here.
Croissants, just infinitely tiny croissants that just nest smaller and smaller into a
I was thinking the spiral,
size.
like the crescent, right, just keeps getting smaller and smaller. It's like Zeno's croissant.
Oh, we need to have AI. I need to have Midjourney generate fractal croissants. Maybe I'll do that in the background.
There you go. Yeah, go for it.
Smugness.
So game designers tend to want people to appreciate the work that they have put into a game, and the most straightforward way to do that is to make the game force the player to experience the thing that the game designer wanted them to experience. So then people will react to that and feel like, oh, the game designer did this thing to me / for me, and now I feel like they've given me a good experience playing this game, right? And you see this all the time with any game designer who's come from movies, any game designer who's an author, because these are all pre-authored experiences where this thing is going to happen, and so the game is designed around making that thing happen. And so if you make the thing happen that the game designer wanted to happen, then you win. And if you do anything else, then you lose. And it's like, well, that's a very narrow experience. It's very linear. Any corridor shooter, all the what were those games where you're like Indiana Jones or whatever? I forget them. But any kind of game that's
like the Tomb Raider type games where you have
Tomb Raider, and I'm thinking of there's one where you're a guy and you're playing as this kind of Indiana Jones kind of explorer guy, but I forget what it's called.
Uncharted.
Uncharted, yeah, exactly. It's so like it's Uncharted,
charted.
but it's totally charted. Yeah, exactly. So Uncharted, all this kind of thing where there's this experience, and you're meant to feel like you're doing something that's interesting and novel, and you're doing it all yourself, but really you're just going down the railroad tracks. In role-playing games, this is called railroading, where the game master will have a plot in mind. They're like, well, here's, the players are going to start off in this tavern, and they're going to go do the dungeon, and then they're going to go fight the crime boss in the city, and then they're going to go face the dragon in the tower, and then they're going to face the evil wizard in the volcano, right? and in order to defeat this guy, they're going to need this thing, and for the dragon, they're going to need a special arrow, and for the wizard, they're going to need a special sword. And so all these things, right, they plan it all out, and they've got this very cool arc, and they've got all this stuff. And then they start the players off in the tavern, and the players immediately like burn the tavern down and take hostage the tavern owner's daughter, and want to go and join the crime lord in the city. And it's like, well, what do you do then? As a game master, what do you do? And I put to you, Luke, what do you do as a game master in that situation?
Oh, I roll with it every time. I'm like, all right, that's what we're doing now. Like, all right, crime boss. And then if I can, I will take my original intent, which is like there's going to be this wizard in the tower, and like the crime boss works for the wizard. Let's go. And I just tie it in, and we just roll with it.
Right. So the ideal thing in my mind is that the game master has a flexible understanding of his world, and is able to adapt to the player's decisions to create an interesting experience, while using the ideas that he's already come up with and just slotting them into different places. What often happens, however, with game masters who are probably less creative, because like not everyone is as creative as Luke and I, and most people can't really think on their feet that well, and so a lot of times what will happen is the game master will say, well, no, this is the path that I'm thinking about, and this is what I've decided is going to happen, and so you can't burn down the tavern. The local fire brigade comes and puts out the fire at the tavern. Nothing is damaged. Yeah. And the tavern daughter, she's rescued by the sheriff. And but I can't have the sheriff like execute you for kidnapping someone, because then that would ruin my wonderful story, not my terrible story. My wonderful story would be ruined. And so I think that probably fractal croissants. That's amazing. I think that probably you're captured by the sheriff, but he lets you go with a warning, right? And so now you can go to the dungeon that you're supposed to be going to. And so that's called railroading, where you stay on the tracks. You can't get off the tracks, and if you try to jump off the tracks, the DM will, to varying degrees of kindness and gentleness to both his plot and the player's agency, put you back on the train so that you can go down the track where you're supposed to go. So, go ahead and talk about your fractal croissants if you want to have.
Oh no, they're just there. They're fractal croissants.
So good.
It's so great. The Infamous has a great example of the chain link fence. You are a demigod running around with lightning powers, and there is if you can't go to a particular zone, there's like a 6-foot chain link fence, and you can't jump and you can't climb fences, so you can't go through there. And there's this horrible immersion breaking experience when I ran into that chain link fence. I'm like, I am not a god. I am restrained by this fence.
Yeah.
And they need to have.
It's the game designer very baldly telling you, look, this is off the rails, right? You've got some rails to go down and go back on the rails.
Right. So you could say that open world is fledgling and like railroad world is not, but the idea of having a available narrative that's optional and will influence the rest of the game, it's always going to be pulling you back in. That's the design space of fledgling. Yeah. Okay. Carry on.
Opposed to railroading. But then there's this other aspect of the game design where maybe the game designer realizes that it's bad to, or that the kind of medium that they're working with games is not well fit to a very linear experience, and they want to give the player some agency, and they want to have some variation and stuff. And so they realize, okay, well, I want to have some variation in the gameplay experience, but I still want to make sure that the player engages with my authored content. And so what you can often have is a very superficial procedural generation on top of pre-authored bones. The gameplay bones are all pre-authored, and so this is something like No Man's Sky, where yes, all the planets are procedural generated, and yes, visually they're all different, and yes, they've all got the resource nodes in different places, but realistically, it is an extremely linear game. You're still gathering the hydrogen in order to gather some deuterium, in order to gather some hyperspace crystals, in order to gather, right? Like, it's just this very linear experience of do the thing so you can get to the next thing. And this kind of comes back to the research idea, but there's these two levels of author content that that people are very hesitant to let go of, understandably, because if you think that your value as a person is in the things that you come up with and the ideas that you have, then it's very threatening to let go of that and be like, well, I'm not actually that important. I can just let other people come up with ideas, or let the game come up with ideas for me, and it's just as good as the things that I come up with, or maybe even better. Or let the game be responsive to the player's choices. I think that whole philosophy is poorly founded, but I understand where the game designers are coming from when they approach it from that way. So there's another aspect in which
you could still make those games, but those would not be fledgling games.
Right. Yeah, that's not what Fledgling is trying to do. Fledgling is trying to be maximally responsive to the player and what the player does in the game and what the player is interested in doing in the game. So it's kind of like real-time modding. You might think of it that way, right? Where the game is creating mods in real time in response to what it is that you're doing, so that the game itself is about the kind of stuff that you are engaging with. But there's kind of a hidden upside of procedural generation, which is that when you author a game, pre-author the whole thing, you get to feel smug and superior to the players because you decided what they're going to do. And if they play the game and they complete it, you're like, I made them go through that choice and I made them do those things. But if you are in a procedural generation mindset, you get to have the enjoyment of playing the game along with the players, because the systems that you design can surprise even you, the designer. And this is something that's it's an often overlooked upside to procedural generation, where it's like, well, it's not all downside. You don't have to abnegate yourself completely, because you get to play the game along with everyone else. And what's his name? Toady One, Tarn Adams, the guy who made Dwarf Fortress, is famous for having spent probably more time playing Dwarf Fortress than anyone, because he enjoys it. He wants to play the game, and it's not like, this is really boring, and I've come up with this storyline and now everyone's going to engage with it, but I, the designer, don't get to engage with it. No, as a procedural generation game designer, you get to play the game along with everyone else, and you get to experience that wonder of like, whoa, I didn't expect that to happen. All these emergent things are engaging me, and I went off the beaten track and went over to this weird thing, and there's this little library with all these books about stuff that I didn't expect to have happen. And so there's an upside, but it's kind of a hidden upside, because it's not you don't get to grandstand in front of everyone as the game designer and be like, look what I did. But you do get to enjoy it along with everyone else who plays the game and be like, hey, look what we're doing together. Look what we're experiencing together.
Right. That's the space that we care a lot more. Let's continue into Destiny and Eric. The next page is I think very similar to this, right? We were talking about author inevitability. It has to go there.
Yeah. So this is similar. It's in the same vein of what I often see this in books, in fan fiction, and often in role playing, like GMs in role playing games. There's this sense that when a creative person comes up with what might happen, it's easy to justify not thinking about what might happen anymore by saying, the thing that I think might happen is the thing that must happen, and then just justify it, extrapolate backward for all the justifications for why the thing that you came up with has to be the thing that is the thing that happens. And so this happens in books a lot, where an author is writing something and they're like, well, the character does this, and then the character does that, and then they have to make this choice, and then they have to do this thing, and you end up, going down the trail of writing a book, and at the end you're like, well, it's justified because it all makes sense because it had to happen that way. There's no other way it could have happened, and it's just not true. Like there's so many things that could have happened, and you get to choose one as an author of a book, but it's your responsibility to kind of think through maybe 2 or 3 things that might happen before you decide on the one thing that is the thing that happens. And it happens to game designers as well, where you get a game storyline and, well, this thing and then this thing and then this thing, and so therefore you beat the boss. And for linear games, again, there's nothing really wrong with that if that's what you're creating. But for procedurally authored games, it's really important to keep in mind that the first thing that comes to mind when you think of what will probably happen isn't necessarily the thing that would necessarily happen in a certain scenario. And so you need to be open to the game doing things that you didn't expect, or the game resulting in things that you weren't expecting from the outset. It's kind of a tension between having confidence in your understanding of the world and like running a simulation in your brain. If the game doesn't really match up with that, it's like, well, I got to fix the game because it's wrong. But then on the other hand, having confidence in the systems that you design, so that when the game does something you don't expect, you can be like, wow, well, that's kind of cool. I didn't expect that. Maybe that's a sign that my imagination is kind of limited in this way.
Right. I mean, I would love to learn something from my own, like one of the primary things that we're hoping to do with procedural generation in a like more cultural broad sense is procedural generation creates content for AI, which is neural nets, to learn off of. So you can generate content for then the AI, the neural net to train off of that information and integrate new sets of data. So like you train off of all the wars that have ever happened, but you can procedurally generate wars, and then the AI can learn about those wars from that perspective. Now you'll obviously you're teaching it, you're baking in your own impressions about how the mechanics work by doing procedural generation. Then you're absolutely going to get biased AI that are dumb in all the same ways that your procedural generation is dumb. But it's still very helpful. I want to make a quick note about It Takes Two. I actually haven't played it, but it's a cooperative game, two people playing couch games, and you're playing as kind of sounds like somewhat unfortunate main characters, their parents, and it's got this strong narrative about concern and like working together in cooperation and empathy or whatever else. And one of the things that a lot of people found was a jarring tone shift, because a lot of the game is cutesy and puzzly and like this. You have to just like put the beat down on a very adorable elephant, and that cries candy, and you need candy or something like that. And there's this long sequence where it's basically like a boss fight where you run around and you just beating the shit out of this character who's crying and wailing and running away from you in a way that's very babyish.
Oh no!
And it puts you in like you cannot get through. You can't play the progression of the game because it's linear until you do this action. And like some people just like don't play the game anymore, which I absolutely commend this, because like, and some people are like, well, I had to grit through, and like it was such, regardless of whether or not it's a good thing that they did this, it was a very interesting thing, and it makes a very good conversational piece, because they're having a particular experience and they're forcing a tone shift, and they're taking the players in a cutesy, engaged space to do something like really nasty for a prolonged time to a suffering individual. And that's very unpleasant. So, like the idea of injecting that in the middle of the game, to me, I don't want that in Fledgling. That's like, I'm okay with people doing art pieces and they want to like make a particular story and they wanted to bring people into an empathetic situation where they are relating to characters that don't care about this other person, even if you do as a player. And that's an interesting place to put somebody. But in general, my thoughts about Fledgling is that we're trying to put people into characters that they want to relate to or do relate to, because that's where they find most interest. Like I don't actually have a lot of vested interest in forcing someone off of the path through experience they don't want to have. And that's I think important for education and correction, if we're talking about that, but I'm not invested in making corrective, informative pieces that grandstand my ideas directly. I would like to just embed true, best we can, procedural generation, and let that thing be the thing on the stage, as opposed to my ideas directly. And that's kind of important to design space. Anyway.
Right.
Fable.
Yeah, well, and yeah, another great example of authorial arrogance is the Fable games by Peter Molyneux, who's famously overpromises things. But I think he has he has some interesting ideas, but the Fable games really highlight how the demand that the players play through the author's ideas can go badly wrong. So I think there's one place where you're probably more than one place where the main character gets captured in a cutscene and tortured for 10 years, I think, something like that. And like
It's 1 year per, so you get captured and tortured for a year, and then you get to do a race with a bunch of other peasants who are being tortured for a year to try and win this chance at a key to unlock your cell, and you can't do it the first time. So you have to be tortured.
There you go.
For 2
Yeah,
years.
it has to be 2 years, and you have to lose the race once. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's so bad. So and like everything about that is wrong, right? Getting captured in a cutscene is wrong because you should give the player the option to succeed, right? You don't make them fail in a cutscene. Torturing the player character, for something that you, the author, did to them is like, well, no, you don't. The player should be punished for their own action. Maybe if they're like a really bad person, there's a whole good evil scale in the game, right? So like maybe if you're a really bad person, you get punished for being a bad person, or maybe if you're a really good person, you get punished for being a really good person. But it's just like, no, it just happens regardless of what you've done in the game. There's no reason for it.
And it's supposed to be your story where you kind of do the thing and you act the way you want, and it's like.
Right.
Your character would not, like my character that I was playing when I was playing Fable would not sit in a jail cell for a year. Also, he was like had like 18 strength or whatever. Yeah. So he would just like he would literally beat the hell out of somebody. Like there would be some way to contest that situation even without your magical gear.
Right.
Which you end up finding in a box outside, which is dumb because they would have taken all your stuff and used it,
or
and you
sold
would fighting people.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, that's so dumb.
Yeah. So Fable games are terrible. Well, I don't know. They're not terrible. If you go into them knowing what they are, they can be a fun experience.
They are not what he promised.
Yeah, they were definitely not what was promised by Peter Molyneux. We will never forget you, Peter. We know what you did. Okay. Authorial arrogance. All right. So last topic, unless we want to come up with more topics. Order, Chaos, and Hero's Journey.
Go.
I have, for a while, been thinking about the ways in which the game space is ultimately a way to explore the archetypal space. So, like we were talking earlier about research, right? Research begins in a place where you know some things, you know how to do some things. You're in a place of order. You're in a place of understanding. Maybe a little too much order, right? Like the game space is very demarcated. You understand how to do everything in your game space. You've solved everything there. And doing research, you're going out into chaos and discovering something new, to find something that's valuable, right? To find the treasure. You defeat the dragon and find the treasure. And so, but in order to do that, you have to encounter death. You have to encounter your own mortality. It has to be hazardous for you. It has to be dangerous. And so when you go out to research something, it has to cost you something. And the more it costs you, the more possibility there is that it's going to be something valuable that you bring back. So that's like the hero's journey mapped onto research. There's also the hero's journey mapped onto just journeys in the game, like physical travel, right? And I think Gloomhaven does this pretty well, right? Where you're going on the way to the dungeon and you have an encounter on the way to the dungeon. So there's like this mini hero's journey while you're traveling to the main hero's journey in the dungeon.
Mm-hmm. A little like, yeah, again, fractal design where you have this sort of pathway and always kind of comes through the same direction. So this is the hero's journey is what I want to build Breadwinner about. Is like, can I make bread and economy, and then embed the procedural journey of a hero's journey, and then you will play Breadwinner, and then the game will offer you a hero's journey through this space, where there's a adversary to overcome. You go into something that's unknown, so you're going to go off the pathway that I have set, right? I have a particular nodes. You have to go off of that pathway. There's going to be some sort of conflict out there in space that's associated with bread, but is not on the channel of bread, right? It's something related to bread. It's going to be diplomacy or commerce or violence or I don't know, whatever else you're mixing this. You're coming off the pathway. You have some sort of adversary. You have to overcome that thing. And then when you return back to bread, which is the main thing that this game is about, you've brought something with you, whether that be research or more bread or a new understanding or something. And it's going to enrich or expand or advance your capacity to win bread. So that's the idea, is like this procedural hero's journey along a particular pathway. And once that's established, the hope is to be able to take that center axiom and make games around some other noun that you really care about, whether it's something else, and then we can do that.
Right,
okay.
right. Some other noun or some other verb, right? Baking being the verb in question for breadwinner, perhaps.
So I don't know about that. Right
No?
now, I'm only thinking in nouns and
Okay.
verbs of the game space.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Maybe verb. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I think the noun verb thing. I was watching a video about the Apollo guidance computer, and it's got a noun verb system where it was so it had to be so lightweight and so condensed that it doesn't display information. It just displays the noun number and the verb number, and then you have to just remember what that means. So it's like, you say, like, enter in noun this, verb that, or whatever, or when it gives you back some data, it's like, okay, well, this is, noun 12, verb 16, which I'm making these numbers up, but it means, this is the landing Doppler radar, and this is your x-axis velocity or something, right? And so it's like Doppler radar reading is the verb, and the noun is the x-axis velocity, and then just gives you
one bit, one byte.
Yeah,
one byte register for what thing it is.
It was a 15-bit, so it wasn't even 2 bytes. It was a 15-bit computer. Anyway, fascinating stuff. So they had. But they had this noun-verb thing, and I was thinking about, like, in order to make Fledgling truly a universal experience, we should be able to distill down, perhaps with the help of AI, the set of nouns and verbs to the canonical set that then gets encoded in the game numerically. So you can have, like, a translator that translates the game's output into English or into whatever other language, and you can have different translators. So you can have a translator, and this goes back to the skinning idea of you can skin this and translate it into a very medieval setting where the noun of violence and the verb of violence and the noun of person is like a peasant and and using a sword on someone, or like attacking someone with a spear. Or you could translate it into a very science fiction thing where it's a guy in a spacesuit with a laser rifle or something, right? But the fundamental concepts are these tokenized, to use a AI term, where they've been tokenized so that you can easily transform them and work with them. But they're just these these indexed ideas, and then when you want to change the way the game works, you can remap it on a surface level, or you can change the tokens that it's working with. So you can be like, well, we don't want to have any violence in the game. What about playing in a game world that just doesn't have any violence? No violence verbs exist in this in this entire universe, and the game should be able to play with that and work it.
Memory of where I really wanted Fledgling to happen. This was many years ago. You and I and a few other friends were playing a game of Microscope. And Microscope, if you don't know, is a world-building collaborative thing. You kind of have 3x5 cards, and you work out eras and events and then scenes, and you kind of role-play out these scenes within this thing. And my friends and I tend to play a lot with eras and events because we mostly care about that macro scale. And I also played it recently where it was a bunch of like improv kids, and we basically just did scenes the whole time. Totally different game. Anyway, point is, you and I, like the pre-game is you're trying to establish the things that are in the world and are not in the world. And you go around the world to agree on what this world space was. And you wanted to create a world. One of the things you proposed was deceit. It's like a world that has no deceit. And my response at the time, which still might be true, is like, I don't know how to conceive of that. Like, that breaks my brain. I don't know how to process a world that doesn't like, it would be so fundamentally different given how many spaces we use deceit, especially like given how social interactions, like from an Evo bio sense, came about. Deceit is like an enormous part of how that works. Is like putting up false fronts to project something that's not the case, so I don't get kicked out of the tribe. So that's from that whole perspective. It's like, I don't know how to think about a world where deceit is not occurring. And you were talking about like no stealth. Like, that means you can't sneak up on people and like fully all the way in, like all information up front. Very autistic friendly universe. And
Right.
And I look forward to having Fledgling be able to show me what type of world that would be like. And that's something I look forward to, which I'm sure will happen someday, is that I'll be able to put in this, be like, there's no deception, all information is public, and then give me a world where that's the case and it makes sense. And it's probably going to be so alien to me that it will take me a long time to orientate myself.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be public, right? You can have a world without deceit with private knowledge, with secrets. It just doesn't. You can't tell someone something that you know is false, right? You could even be You could be mistaken, right? You could see something and be mistaken about what it is that you see, but you can't mislead someone about it. Anyway, yeah, it would be a fascinating thing to explore. I mean, that's kind of the world that I try to live in. Is like, I don't understand how anyone else operates in this world where they have deceit all the time. Anyway, is there anything else you want to talk about? Yeah. Fledgling Talk? I
don't think so. Let's do a quick recap of where we are and what we're doing next from a practical standpoint.
Oh man, practical. See, I hate this. I don't want practical.
I know you really hate this part, but what we have right now is Breadwinner has a procedurally generated, like node-based, nested environment where there's land and there's locations and like wheat fields and stuff like that, and then buildings, and inside those buildings they also have a map that's built on the same code that's got like tables and water and wheat and bread, right, and ovens and things like this. And then like we're slowly building out all the space, and we have that is functioning, and it's working off a network of related nodes. So you punch in, you're like, here's all the nodes, here are how they're related to each other, and then it kind of creates this little grid-based world, which you could scale up or down, and you can explore it, and stuff will show up. So that's what's going on over there. It's pretty rudimentary. The
is that on GitHub or something somewhere? Where can people get to that?
That is unbacked up on my dying laptop.
What?
That's where that is. That's a great thing. I should put it on.
Put a GitHub up. Will be available on GitHub.
Don't promise me that I'm going to do anything, but yeah. So that's happening, and then the second thing
is that running on the Universal Architect node simulation engine.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
So if you guys are interested, Universal Architect is available on junst.com or .org.
And that's good.
There we go.
To me, that's a very central mechanic to make things work, and it helps you put in abstractly. Paul built it for designing spaceships, and it tells you what to put in the spaceship. And I did it for building bread, and then and what type of infrastructure do you need to generate bread? Okay, so that's
right.
That's
so it
over
kind of
there.
Showcases a bit of the versatility of the system.
The social game, that the social mechanics are kind of working, but that's living on my desk in a box right now. and I haven't worked on it since I moved desks. So that's kind of stalled out, but it's kind of working.
Which one is this again?
That's the interaction, the social mechanics.
Oh,
like
yeah,
how you
lunch
do,
table.
Well, yeah, the mechanics that are necessary to motivate lunch table and also diplomacy. So that's kind of sitting a spot. And then the last one was you and I were working on my little space shooter. I made a little shmup, and you shoot things, and you kind of procedurally generates bad guys. I'm handcrafting them, but hopefully soon we'll be procedurally generating bad guys and procedurally generating models and the backgrounds, and you'll be able to have those little shmup, and you your guns kind of like mod together, so you pick up a mod, and this is very like Binding of Isaac. Binding of Isaac you get mods and they all stack on top of each other instead of replacing one another. So oftentimes in these games, you pick up a weapon and you switch from spread shot to straight shot, and it's really obnoxious because I want to have my straight shot to be a little more spready. So couple games that do this really well. Nova Drift, which I've been playing quite a bit of, they made that after, and they have a little arena shmup where things come in and you're blowing things up. But every time you get an upgrade, there's particular things that happen. So they have a very constrained game space, and I want one that has runaway effects, where at the end of the game, I get really satisfied when I have this absolutely ridiculous weapon that's going to be, it's like shooting out planes that shoot my guns that are actually mines that home in on people.
Sure.
Like, yes, absolutely, this is great.
Kind of so Risk of Rain and Risk of Rain 2 kind of do that a bit.
Yeah, Risk of Rain, and it was just a little, I want to just turn up the insanity and let people win, because Risk of Rain, you basically can't win. I mean, you can get to the obelisk.
Right.
But yeah,
endless.
this idea of the endless in general. And like maybe endless is okay, but I like games that have this exponential takeoff where either the adversary, the world exponentially spikes faster than you do, and then you lose, or you spike faster than the world, and then you win. And I really like that design space. I feel like that's a very fun way for games to terminate. And that's what I'm trying to do in the shmup. And then you and I had some ideas about how to connect the shmup to more like Journey, where you have some sort of puzzle pathway to get through. You crash your spaceship, you have to you get captured, something like this that becomes more a narrative-based game. And we haven't talked about this, but I thought the idea of a point-and-click adventure that's generated inside, have Mid-Journey generate our point-and-click nodes around the mechanic. So you like put in the hidden objects, and then you can do a point-and-click adventure where you're getting resources. So it shows you a picture of forest, and you're like, oh, there's the piece of ore or something like that, or a stick or whatever else, and click on the thing. It's like, oh yeah, that's a thing that the game has embedded in there. You're correct to find that. And then you get that as your resource, because then you have a little like staged progress through mechanic, which you can use to do like non-spaceship shooting things, problem solving. And then once we have that mechanic, then we can start tying it into other things. And these act as like hooks for the other mechanics. And then eventually I want to put wheat on the shmup and make it space wheat and blah, blah, blah. So we have planned out in the future. So these are all the mechanics. I'd love to get the shmup up and going. That would be kind of fun. And then I want to come back and explore more about the idea of Journey, and how we can use AI to create beautiful, interesting spaces to explore. Okay, that's it. That's it. This is great.
The idea of a machine learning generated hidden object game is fascinating to me, because I can imagine a Where's Waldo, where it like generates a Where's Waldo kind of thing, and the Where's Waldo where there's like just like a 10,000 Waldos, but they're all slightly different from the actual Waldo. Like I can totally imagine an AI machine learning thing just being like, okay, like give me a picture of the object and I'll generate one of those, panels that's just like full of this object in weird distortions. And then you just like paste the object over the top of it. It's like, find the object in this field of objects. They're all identical.
Right. So find here's a space thing we can make. You take 3 different objects and you throw it in there, and it's like, generate me a space fully populated by some sort of like fusion of these 3 concepts plus a little bit of extra nonsense. And it's like, you got to find the 3 archetypical concepts within this map. Like, find where they are. Well, like where this thing was generated. It's like, find the things that were put in here that have meaning, and run the AI simulation backwards. It's like, it's peer
be fascinating,
into this picture and find the thing that was put in here on purpose.
Yeah,
right.
Like,
and then
so
the game will
guess
progressively make it harder. Yeah, it's kind of like guess the prompt. Yeah, but then actually guess the prompt would be pretty cool, because then you can be like, here's a picture. I know they try to do this with the facial expressions, and like they make the sad face, but they also put the text is like, it makes you upset. And it's like, guess the feeling, like try and figure this out.
Or like GeoGuessr kind of, where it's like, here's one picture from a certain perspective. Yeah. What's the perspective that this is from? But in an intellectual sense, or conceptual, or stylistic, maybe.
Oh, yeah, I love the idea of a conceptual space thing. Oh, anyway.
And that's kind of what I did with these pre-visualizations. These images, by the way, are just the outline text pasted into Midjourney. Basically, I added a little bit of variation and stuff, but it's basically just like decoupling of visuals and mechanics is the one at the top, and like that's what it is. It's not any special prompt. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if that would be an easy enough game to like, because it might be virtually impossible unless you had a multiple choice, maybe human authored multiple choice. I guess you could have the AI generate. You could have a text AI generate some other options. You give it the prompt and then be like, generate some other things that are in this same vein but are different.
It's like an SAT. SATs, like exactly. Which one is most like the other one? Yeah. I was thinking more just like literally you would have like, you would draw some pictures or like have some sort of craft, like the authored experience would be some distinct things like the epic sword or whatever else, and you just put that into the picture and tell the AI to fill in around it.
Oh, like outpainting it.
Right, yeah, outpainting it, and then it would mesh them together, and then the hidden object game would be like, you sit down and you click on the objects that were the ones that were embedded in the picture, and that the rest of it was generated around. Which I think
I'd be fascinated to try that.
I think that should be pretty doable, because you can kind of see where things are coming from and originating in concept space. And that might be again, it doesn't have to be a whole robust game experience. It's just, if it could be a useful mechanic, then you can use this as a generic mechanic to help you do a tiny little puzzle as a short game loop block along a pathway. So it's like, you get to the spot, and it's like, okay, find the puzzle pieces. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, now put the puzzle pieces together. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, go through.
Yeah. Well, you could certainly break up the image into puzzle pieces and use it to populate a puzzle. Yeah. There's 1,000 different ways you could go with that. That's a cool idea, though. ML generated hidden objects, because I know a lot of the games that we both are interested in, because we're men, are masculine dominated fields, right? Exploration and stuff like that. But and violence. But hidden object games are famously female dominated gaming space, and there's a huge ecosystem of just hidden object games that tons of women play, and I don't know anything about them because I'm not interested in them, but there's a whole space there.
Right. It's rich narrative spaces, and putting things in order, and that type of thing. That's a big part of the thing, is here's here's chaos, not exploring new chaos, but making order out of the chaos that you're given. And that's a different type of mechanic.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for joining me.
Great.
This has been great. If anyone's interested in this stuff, I will put links in the description, and what kind of stuff you can read or watch to watch this later. I know a bunch of people are saying they're going to watch it afterward because they had to go to work or go to bed or something. But
right.
Yeah,
also, then you can watch us on 2x speed, which I am not offended by.
Firm recommendation: watch on 2x speed.
Firm recommendation, maybe 2.5. All right. That's great. All right. I don't know how we sign off.